My police work always seemed to me to be more than just a job. It was a calling that I felt with every cell in my body. But everything changed the night I first changed from my usual evening shift to morning shift. Usually, the morning shift was considered calmer. However, this was far from the truth. My partner, Detective Mark Lake, often joked that only the worst cases were left for the morning. I always thought it was just talk. But when the woman's body was brought to our station that morning, my heart sank. We received a call about suspicious activity at an old building on the outskirts of town. It was previously used as a warehouse, but now it stood abandoned. Me and Mark went to the place. At first, everything seemed ordinary. Broken windows, graffiti on the walls, traces of the recent stay of homeless people. But when we went inside, the atmosphere changed. There was a pungent smell in the air that filtered through our masks. Various things were scattered on the floor, old clothes, rusty tools, paper packages, and suddenly we saw her. The body of the woman lying in the corner was twisted in an unnatural position. Her eyes were wide open, and her mouth froze in a terrible scream. But what really scared me was the writing on the wall behind her. The writing is done in blood, so sharp and clear. "You are next." I began to scan the premises for signs, but nothing. There were no prints, no witnesses, no video cameras, just us and this terrible message. Mark asked me if I felt something was wrong, and to be honest, I also felt like we were trying to solve a puzzle that had already started to solve itself, and we were just playing by its rules. We got back to the station, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. All the time, this disturbing feeling did not leave me. Whatever it was, it had already started the game, and I was sure that this game would end in death. Whose death was the question? The next morning, I barely slept after my shift. Thoughts about the woman lying in that warehouse haunted me. But unfortunately, I was not destined to rest for long. My phone rang with a signal I had long since forgotten. It was a special signal for critical situations. I haven't used it in years. When I picked up the phone, Mark was on the other end. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "John, you have to see this. We've found another body." Mark did not elaborate on the details over the phone, which was unusual for him. He only said that they were waiting for us at the place where it all began. I gathered myself quickly, trying to calm my nerves. Something deep inside me told me that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than a simple criminal case. When I arrived at the site, the warehouse was surrounded by yellow tape, but inside everything was the same as yesterday. The woman's body was already taken to the morgue, but the marks on the walls and floor remained. Mark stood in the corner with several other detectives, all of them sullen and silent. "Here," Mark said softly as I got closer. He pointed to a spot not far from where the first body lay. At first, I didn't notice anything, but when I got closer, my heart sank again in my chest. On the floor, directly on the old wooden boards, was laid out something like a runic symbol made of blood. And again the inscription, this time less noticeable, but still just as ominous. "Know what he is here?" Mark was talking about footprints. The blood on the symbol had not yet dried, which meant that all this had happened very recently. But we didn't see anyone when we arrived. No one passed by us and could leave this message. "We searched the entire warehouse," said one of the detectives, looking away. "Nothing." It's more than we can imagine," Mark added, looking at me seriously. "We have to find whoever did this before someone else dies." But who could it be, and what are these signs? I could feel the tension building by the minute. All my instincts screamed that we were involved in a game with an unknown enemy, and that this enemy had reasons and goals that we still did not understand. I could only guess what these messages meant. I took a step back, trying to gather my thoughts. But suddenly I noticed something new, something that wasn't there before. On the floor, among the scattered things, there was an old police badge. It was very old, with a worn surface, but I could see the serial number and name. My gaze froze on the inscription, Detective Thomas King. I felt a chill in my back. Thomas King was a detective who went missing 20 years ago while investigating a similar case. His body was never found and the case remained unsolved. Now his icon was right in front of me. It couldn't be a coincidence. Someone or something draws our attention to the past, and that someone knew more than we could imagine. And I knew that deciphering this symbol and messages was the key to everything. But can we find her before it's too late? Part 4. Shadows of the Past. Dozens of questions swirled in my head. What happened to Detective King? And how did his icon end up here in the place where these terrible events are now taking place? My brain was strained to the limit, trying to tie all the threads together. Mark was staring at me, and I could tell we were both feeling the same thing, an overwhelming fear of the unknown. I picked up the badge, feeling its cold metal in my palm. It was so real, so palpable, like the fear that it settled somewhere deep in my heart. Someone wants us to dig deeper into this story, to get on the trail of something, or someone behind all these deaths. Mark, this is some kind of message, I said as I looked at the icon again. Someone is playing with us by leaving clues. Playing or leading us, Mark answered, his voice quiet but strained. What if we're already trapped, John? What if it's not us investigating, we're being led? Where and why? These words of his hung in the air, leaving me in thought. Maybe he is right. Maybe all this time we were just pawns in someone else's game. But this game became more and more dangerous with each step. We decided to go back to the station to try to find more information about the King case. But as soon as we went inside, we immediately noticed that the atmosphere there had also changed. Everyone was gloomy, and many looked at us suspiciously. What happened? Mark asked one of his colleagues. Another challenge just came in, he replied. Another body, and there's a message there, too. Mark and I exchanged glances, and I knew this was just the beginning. Someone or something decided to test us for strength, and I was sure that the real horror was still ahead. We drove to the scene of the call, trying to keep our nerves under control. This time, we were led to an abandoned building on the other side of town. It was clear that whoever was behind this was not going to stop until he had achieved his goal, whatever it is. The building was old. It had once been a shop, but now everything inside was covered with a layer of dust and decayed over time. We climbed the stairs to the second floor where a terrible scene awaited us. Another body, this time a man, lay in the middle of the room, the same frozen grimace of horror on his face. But this was not an ordinary man. He was also a policeman. Mark bent down to get a better look, and his face darkened even more. That's Billy Thompson, he said. We served together several years ago. He retired. And he was on the King case, I added, recalling the details we'd studied last night. All these years they kept quiet about her, and now someone decided to open old wounds. But that was not the worst part. Next to Billy's body, we found another inscription. This time it was short but very clear. We found him. Did you find anyone? King or someone else? My mind was already in overdrive, but I knew one thing. Whoever was behind these murders had access to information that even we didn't have. And whatever happened years ago has now come back to haunt those involved in the case. Mark took me aside to talk in private. John, this isn't just another killing spree. This is personal. I'm starting to think we're all being targeted. I nodded. And we don't know who's next. But maybe we can find out if we uncover the truth about King. That's the only way we can stop this nightmare. We decided to go deeper. Mark called several old colleagues who might know something, but many refused to talk or said they didn't remember anything. Only one agreed to meet, but he did so with great fear. Our informant, a former detective named Gary Nixon, made an appointment at an old establishment he had frequented in the past. When we arrived, he was already waiting for us in the corner of the room, constantly looking around as if someone was watching him. Sit down, he said softly as we approached. His hands were shaking a little and his eyes were worried. Harry, we know you know more than you're letting on, Mark began, trying not to pressure him. These murders, they're somehow related to what happened to King, right? Harry held his breath as he looked at us and finally decided to speak. Yes, they're connected, but it's not just old grudges or revenge, it's something much darker. He explained that the King case was one of the most mysterious and terrifying he had ever dealt with. King investigated a series of disappearances, but the more he learned, the more withdrawn he became. Colleagues noticed his changes. He became more and more nervous and paranoid, and then he just disappeared, leaving behind only a bunch of questions. "I know King found something that should never have seen the light of day," Harry said quietly, "and that something has now come back to close all possible ends." "What exactly did he find?" I asked, feeling that we were already close to the solution. But Harry just shook his head. "It's not just information, John. It's something much worse. Something that can destroy you if you delve too far into it. I don't want you involved. There's still a chance to escape." But we knew that running away was not an option. We were already too deep in this matter, and now we had to find out what this terrible truth was that had been hidden in the shadows for so long. After talking with Gary Nixon, we were left feeling as if we were standing on the edge of an abyss. We knew we were walking on thin ice, but we could not turn back. The next step was to go back to the archives and check all the old material on the King case. There was an oppressive silence in the department. No one talked about the murders, but everyone understood that something terrible was happening. Mark and I went down to the archive where the dust and smell of old documents created an ancient atmosphere of mystery. We found King's case. Most of the materials were badly damaged, with some pages missing, others smeared with ink or torn out. But what remained led us to a terrible suspicion. Among the documents, we found recordings that testified to the intense persecution of King before his disappearance. He received threats, and there were also cases when his car was damaged by unknown persons. What struck us the most was that in his last notes it was said that he had found something more than just a maniac. King wrote about a place he called the Source. All his recordings stopped at this word, leaving us confused. What is this source? And does it have anything to do with the series of gruesome murders going on now? "I think we need to find this place," Mark said as he closed the last file. "Maybe that's where the clue lies. But we have to be careful, John. We don't know what we're up against." And he was right. What we faced was not just a crime. It was something much worse, and its shadow loomed over us with every step. The old building on the outskirts of town, which was mentioned in King's records, was known among the locals as a place where mysterious events took place since the middle of the last century. People said that there was a network of tunnels under it that led far beyond the city limits. We decided to go there immediately. The place looked deserted when we arrived, but his silence was ominous. Mark and I took lanterns and began to descend into the basement. The stairs creaked underfoot and the air grew heavier. We walked in the dark until we came to a heavy metal door. They were partially open, and we carefully went inside. What we saw made our hearts beat faster. The walls were covered with old newspaper clippings, drawings, and photographs. All this depicted scenes of horror, disappearances, murders, torture, and they were all associated with the same name, Source. In the center of the room stood a table on which lay old maps and diagrams. Mark bent down to get a better look. "This is the city plan," he said, and I realized what we had found. Among other documents, we found King's notes. He described tunnels leading to a place he called the Heart of the Source. His last words were, "If you read this, know that I have gone there, and if I do not return, destroy this place, for it is evil." I felt the cold seeping into my bones. We decided to find this place, but now we knew we were walking towards something incredibly dangerous, and who knows if we will return from there. We went into the tunnels, not knowing what awaited us there. The lamps illuminated only the narrow corridor in front of us, and the further we went, the thicker the air became. The tunnels were old, damp, and full of the stench of decay, as if no one had visited them in decades. Every step we took echoed loudly, adding an ominous feel to the atmosphere. We went through several branches following the blueprints left by King, but with each new turn, it felt like we were plunging deeper into some inexplicable evil. "There's got to be something here," Mark said, scanning the walls. They were covered with old inscriptions and symbols, the meaning of which we did not understand. But one thing was clear: these tunnels were not built for nothing. They led to something that had to remain hidden. After a few minutes, we came to a massive wooden door that looked as if no one had opened it for decades. Mark carefully raised the lantern, illuminating the door, and we saw an inscription in ancient Latin, Cor Tenebrarum, Heart of Darkness. I felt the blood pounding in my temples. "That's it," I said, and Mark nodded as he slowly made his way to the door. The door opened with difficulty, and a large hall appeared in front of us, the walls of which were covered with drawings and inscriptions that inspired horror. In the middle of the hall stood an ancient stone altar on which were scattered old photographs, documents, and most strikingly, skulls. Mark approached the altar and began to examine the documents. "It's all about those who King investigated," he said. "Disappearing people, mysterious murders, and experiments. This place is the center of everything." But then we heard a sound. Somewhere in the depths of the tunnels, something was moving, approaching us. We immediately turned off the lights and listened. It was a soft but distinct sound of footsteps. "They know we're here," Mark whispered. "We have to get out." We began to carefully move back, trying not to make any sound, but the steps were getting closer and closer, and then we realized that our way out was already cut off. We knew that time was short. At the sounds of approaching footsteps, we rushed back through the tunnels trying to find another exit, but the more we ran, the deeper we plunged into the labyrinth of the dungeon. The walls narrowed and the air grew heavier. The lights flickered as if they were going to go out at any moment, and then we heard their voices, a whisper, quiet and ominous, that penetrated our consciousness and shook our nerves. "We have to get to another exit," I said, trying to control myself. But in my heart, I knew that this labyrinth was a trap created to drag us into a dead end. Mark stopped suddenly, his face twisted in horror. "John, can you see that?" he whispered, pointing ahead. And I saw. Far ahead of us, in the darkness, something was moving. A figure almost invisible in the darkness, but real enough to recognize. "It can't be," I said, not believing my eyes. It was a silhouette of a man, but somehow wrong, distorted, as if his body did not belong to this world. Mark started to back away, but then the figure began to move towards us, slowly but inexorably. I felt a cold fear grip my limbs and knew it was more than just a killer. It was something that we couldn't understand and that definitely shouldn't exist. "Run!" Mark shouted, and we rushed in the opposite direction. But the tunnels were confusing and we quickly realized we didn't know where we were. When we finally got to the next fork, it was too late. The figure was already close, its whispers filling our ears and its shadow covering us. I realized that we were cornered, and now there is only one thing left: find out the truth or die trying to reveal it. Mark and I stood with our backs against the cold, damp wall. The shadow was getting closer, its silhouette becoming more and more distinct, and we both knew there was no going back. We are trapped, and all our efforts to get out of here seem futile. "We have to destroy this place," Mark whispered, his voice shaky but determined. He pulled out a lighter and a can of gasoline from his pocket, which we grabbed earlier, and looked at me. I nodded. We knew this was our last chance. If we do not stop this evil here and now, it will continue to spread and consume innocent people. We could have died, but it might have been the only opportunity to do something meaningful. Mark began to pour gasoline around, covering the altar, walls, and floor. The shadow was already a few meters away from us, its presence pressing on our minds, causing despair and fear in our hearts. But we continued. When the gas was drained, Mark took one last look at me. "Finished?" he asked. "Ready," I answered, though my insides were shaking with terror. This was our last chance. Mark lit the lighter and threw it on the floor. Flames instantly erupted, engulfing the altar and spreading throughout the hall. We retreated back, watching as the fire began to consume everything around us. But the shadow did not retreat. She approached us as if she was not afraid of fire. I felt her presence begin to affect my thoughts, causing chaos and panic in my head. "Run!" I shouted to Mark, but it was too late. The shadow was already upon us, its cold hand touching mine, and I felt something incredibly dark and sinister consume me from within. Mark was also fascinated by this evil. We both fell to our knees trying to fight, but the strength was leaving us. The fire raged around us, the walls cracked and crumbled, but the shadow did not retreat. And then, something strange happened. In the fire I saw King's face, which seemed to appear out of nowhere. He looked at me as if he was trying to say something, but his words were inarticulate. I realized that this was his trap, his way of stopping evil, even if it cost our lives. And then I felt the fire begin to consume not only us, but also the shadow itself. The darkness receded, its power waning, until it finally dissolved into flame. Shadow couldn't resist anymore. And when the fire consumed everything, Mark and I fell to the ground. Our bodies burned, but our souls freed. The last thing I remember is how the ceiling of the hall began to collapse, and everything around us plunged into chaos. And in that moment, when it all came crashing down, I felt a strange sense of peace. We did it. We destroyed evil, even if it meant our own demise. Epilogue: The Chosen Place. A few weeks later, rescuers found our bodies among the ruins of the old dungeon. They could not understand what had happened, but they understood one thing: that place was cursed. Since then, no one dared to go down into those tunnels. Everyone knew something sinister was lurking there, and that our actions prevented it from spreading. But no one wanted to take the risk of checking whether all evil had really been destroyed. The city was slowly returning to normal life, but the legend of us, those who destroyed the heart of darkness, remained alive in people's memories. Although no one knew us by name, everyone knew one thing: there are things that are better left unsolved, and there are evils that are better left in the past. And though our bodies remained in that dungeon, our souls found peace in the knowledge that we had stopped something that could have destroyed countless lives. And the story of the Heart of Darkness remained only a terrible legend, which parents told their children to warn them against the dangers that could lurk in the shadows.